Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Qin Shi broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. No one knew what he was really thinking and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Qin Shi take out his sword, the four perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. 2 Supremes and 2 Peak Soul Formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the four perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because Qin Shi was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Qin Shi controlled, the four perfected masters would not be able to stop Qin Shi. The world was so big, where could he not go? Qin Shi was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the four perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Taoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Qin Shi earlier, he had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead, he persuaded Qin Shi with kind words. Fellow Taoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved. But now this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Taoists can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tianshu ruins. Fellow Taoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my Supreme Palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer, okay? After a long talk, Taoist Master Chongshu also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tiandu, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So as long as Qin Shi was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried? At this point, Qin Shi suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, what a pity, you are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy, am I right? Qin Shi's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Qin Shi might care a lot about the mortals on earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Qin Shi's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Qin Shi in such a brutal way, perhaps Qin Shi might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Qin Shi's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the four great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Qin Shi's attitude. The four great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the Great Formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the Great Formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the great formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Qin? Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Qin Shi and said, "This old man knows his mistake." Qin Shi did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns. Everything in Chengdu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave, and does not dare to ask for Mr.'s forgiveness. I only hope that Mr. can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Chengdu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Chengdu battalion behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. "Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of?" Right. We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Chengdu. These people in front of him were the last hope of Chengdu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd, but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then he turned to look at Qin Shi. Didn't Qin Shi want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mr. can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Chengdu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yuhuan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Qin Shi's hand still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the great array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Chengdu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Qin Shi alone in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters, and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core. From this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobague naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Qin Shi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Chengdu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Qin Shi was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor, so that the inheritance of Chengdu would not be cut off because of this. Then Qin Shi finally cast his gaze on Taoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus, he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Qin will not disturb you all any longer. Goodbye." As soon as his voice fell. Without waiting for Taoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Qin Shi had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade clear grotto heaven. Taoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Qin Shi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort, he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Taoist cave spirit was about to move, Taoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go, today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Chengdu, everything will be handed over to Junior Brother Tongshan to deal with. Junior Brother Cave Spirit, come with me, Senior Brother has something to say to you." Qin Shi left the Supreme Palace enclosure just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Chengdu, because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Chengdu was actually because of this. The 4 Taoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Chengdu. Chengdu represented an era. An era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Qin Shi brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Qin Shi killing the remnants of the Chengdu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the jade-clear grotto heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the 4 sages. If Qin Shi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yuhuan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All 3 parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these 3 bottom lines were not touched. Back to Qin Shi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Qin Shi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aot Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Qin Shi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Qin Shi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Qin Shi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Qin Shi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Qin Shi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Qin Shi could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Aot Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Qin Shi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Qin Shi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Aot Nebula was simply too big, by the time Qin Shi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Qin Shi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Qin Shi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye. That cute little girl back then. She was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nyenyen was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past? I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nyenyen picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Roing hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Qin Shi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nyenyen's height had already reached 2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Qin not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. "Mom, I'm going to find Wenwen and Mingming to play." After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruoying to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Chunghua and Yiji would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the three little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time there were no exquisite toys. Among the children there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today, and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity. With the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called "My Little Friends in Primary School Chinese." The frequency of this question appearing was second only to "The Most Unforgettable Thing" and "My Parents." Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7 or Arthur? The three little fellows strolled around Hohai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the three little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Hohai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Hohai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Hohai to swim. "Nian Nian, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim?" Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the three of them would officially enter the second grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the big cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nian Nian was slightly excited and said to the big cat, "Big Cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The big cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end. Meow. The three children were standing by the lake, and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nian Nian's idea, after letting the big cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the big cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the big cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the big cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow. This time the big cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nian Nian, the big cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake. Meow. With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Chen Shi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. What? With the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. Yin Yin, look. I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Yin Yin saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. Big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold. As she spoke, Yin Yin reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold, I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right? After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Yin Yin began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time they finally realized that they were in the wrong, so they imitated Yin Yin, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Chen Shi wasn't by her side today, Yin Yin still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Chen, you're so lucky. I'm so envious. Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Chen Shi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Chen Shi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Yin Yin was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Chen Shi didn't go home immediately was because, of course it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yu Huan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Chen Shi could chase after Yu Huan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Tuoba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could it be? Could Chen Shi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Chen Shi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Chen Shi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world, Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of Skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Wuxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zygaze and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by Skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Diyu Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Oldme had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Yiji. After a while of peace, Skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Oldme did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the Skyfire incident, Oldme could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yin accepted Qin Shi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Qin Shi. That was, Daiyu Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yin became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju. All in all, Jiang Yin was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzuan. Ever since Jiang Yin had known Qin Shi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Qin Shi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Qin Shi, Jiang Yin immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Qin Shi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qin Shi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yin immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yin didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzuan, who didn't want to work with. Since there were benefits to following Qin Shi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qin Shi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Jiang Yin wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian Yin. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye. The little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian Yin was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qin Shi sent Nian Yin to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Nian Yin's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Qin, it's like this. Qin Yin's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Qin Yin skip a grade? Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the 1st grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip a grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Qin Shi had officially begun to teach Nian Yin cultivation. Although he only taught Nian Yin how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian Yin's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian Yin wouldn't be able to play with the 2 brothers anymore. And this was also the fundamental reason why Qin Shi had always been opposed to letting Nian Yin cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian Yin a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix. Was Qin Shi really different from those flirtatious Qis? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qin Shi could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian Yin really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the 2nd grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qin Shi still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were 2 sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment, and surrounded by children who were older than her, naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qin Shi and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian Yin, tell daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes as if she did not understand what Qin Shi meant. Seeing this, Qin Shi patiently explained to her, the teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the 2nd grade. You can go directly to the 3rd grade and study with the 3rd grade brothers and sisters. Nian Yin, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qin-shi to let Nian skip a grade. To Qin-shi, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qin-shi was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully, you're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Qin-shi led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Qin-shi saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at Teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Qin-shi's mind turned and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, Teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades. Qin-shi turned around and thanked Teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Qin-shi, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier. Taking 10,000 steps back, if your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Qin-shi briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Qin-shi didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Qin-shi never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Qin-shi didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Qin-shi felt sorry for the little fellow just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian didn't want to disappoint Qin-shi. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Qin-shi with a determined face, Dad, I want to skip grades. This time it was Qin-shi's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you. As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian immediately replied, I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me. At this point, Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad? Hearing this, Qin Shi instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people? Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I? When? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. Dad is shameless. The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Qin Shi. Mr. Qin, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it? Qin Shi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Qin Shi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me. Chapter 502. The little girl's 3rd grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to 2nd grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Qin Shi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of 3rd grade class 2. The form teacher of 3rd grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Wuxia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack. Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. Oh. This child is so sensible. You're called Chen, right? I like you. It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into 3rd grade class 2. The 3rd-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. Come, everyone, quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Chen Yan. Everyone welcome. After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li, looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage. She suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. Chen Yan skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you? But her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore? Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen Yan's elder brother and sister, you should. Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her." Yes. Chen Yan is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her. The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. Qin Shi stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier and Yin Yin was on the tall side. Even in the third grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the third row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the third grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, the child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just two people together for fun. On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 tails of silver here. In Qinshi's eyes, Nian Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy. Qinshi naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Qinshi's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Qinshi's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then laid down on a tree branch facing third-year class 2 to take a nap. Then Qinshi nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her third-year studies had officially begun. Thieves in first grade, thieves in second grade. No one chased after the third-grade beauties. Love letters from the fourth grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the fifth grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the sixth grade. This is our class song. Once it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time I was in third grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Qinshi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruoying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Qinshi had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruoying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Yin Yin to school as something that she had to do every day. Ying, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Qinshi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Hearing this, Qinshi was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the two of us? Do you still need to use the word, ask? Qin Ruoying rolled her eyes at him and did not say anything. Seeing this, Qinshi did not feel offended at all, instead he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards Qinshi gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Qinshi. The many changes in Qin Ruoying were naturally seen by Qin Shi. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the Sai courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Qin Shi pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Qin Shi didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruoying to the west wing. However, although Qin Shi didn't intend to interrupt them, Cheng Hua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Qin, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Qin Shi had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruoying's back, then glanced at Cheng Hua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Qin Shi's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the west wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Cheng Hua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Yingying and cultivate their relationship. Cheng Hua was shocked by Qin Shi's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Qin Shi and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xinyuan Cheng Hua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Qin Shi wouldn't agree, so Cheng Hua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Qin Shi eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Xueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Qin Shi did not speak, but Cheng Hua was a little anxious. So, he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Cheng Hua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Qin Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Qin Shi's words, Cheng Hua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Qin Shi's character. Oh no. Mr. Qin was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Cheng Hua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Qin Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Qin Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Qin Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Xueqing, "Since the 2 of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Xueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Cheng Hua's face. They had known each other for so long. Qin Shi would invite the 2 of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Xueqing? Every day she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Qin Shi ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion, Cheng Hua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Cheng Hua did not expect was, Qin Xueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. "Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much. But the 2 of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the 2 of you 7 days off. If I don't see the 2 of you back after 7 days, I think the 2 of you should know very well what the consequences will be." After speaking, Qin Xueqing walked to the east wing without looking back. Only the 2 of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that? Cheng Hua was in a daze. Yi blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Chunghua to visit his family. Qin Xueqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, she could not help but smile. Then he turned around and walked into the west wing. If Chunghua and Yi were to be seen as students, then Qin Xueqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Qin Shi and Qin Xueqing's approval, Chunghua and Yi could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Qin Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Xueqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Chunghua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yi to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the supreme realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yi did not notice the strange look on Chunghua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yi stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile. Chunghua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we? Chunghua did not reply. Seeing this, Yi was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Chunghua and continued to bewitch him. How about the purple myrtle enclosure? The three enclosures are like three wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the three enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So what if Mr. Qin is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the three enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Yi kept bewitching Chunghua. If it was the old Chunghua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Xueqing's constant hardships, Chunghua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yi's incessant chatter, Chunghua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Chen, not you. What are you afraid of? After hearing Chunghua say this, Yi immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Chunghua was because he was afraid that Chunghua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yi was very pleased with Chunghua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. Chunghua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here. Although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Qin is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation. So, at this point Yi deliberately paused and then said with a determined face, after 7 days I will definitely be back here. After hearing Yi's words, Chunghua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yi felt that Chunghua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him and then asked with a puzzled face, What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home? Hearing this, Chunghua shook his head and then muttered in a very strange tone, Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem. What problem? I'm thinking about whether Nian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit. You see, it's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian, right? But I thought about it and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself, what does Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt, these are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift we can't take out something too shabby, right? After hearing Chunghua say this, Yi couldn't help but be stunned. Alright. I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian Nian. Time flew like an arrow and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye, a month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Shueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days and a month had already passed, but Cheng-Hua and Yi still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Shueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Shueqing found Qin Shi and wanted to borrow a xingqia from him. Do you still have a xingqia? Lend it to me. Hearing this, Qin Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, What do you want to do? Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth? Seeing Qin Shueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Qin Shi suddenly laughed. I think they might be delayed by something? Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this, if they don't come back by next month? I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay? After hearing Qin Shi's promise, Qin Shueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Qin Shi really gave her a xingqia, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Cheng-Hua and Yi to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Qin Shi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Cheng-Hua and Yi would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Qin? Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Come. Wonderful book house. Come. Chapter 505. Qin Shi was certain that Cheng-Hua and Yi would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Nian Nian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Huaxia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Nian Nian's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class. So what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Qin Shi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nian Nian looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them, "Quiet! Class is about to begin." It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nian Nian, but they were afraid that Nian Nian would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nyanyan's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. Was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then he gestured for Nyanyan to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhaozhou Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nyanyan led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nyanyan returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized, he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nyanyan took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Yan. Nyanyan frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Yan, I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi heart, 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 heart. Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Nyanyan expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nyanyan already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, she almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. Dad! As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Chen-Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen-Shi's eyebrows suddenly twisted. Nyanyan, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you. When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily. Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Chen-Shi's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, Nyanyan, what's wrong? Did someone bully you? Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Chen-Shi's mind was actually, Nyanyan was ostracized by her classmates? After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Chen-Shi had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nyanyan smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Qinshi had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, "Daddy, someone wrote me a letter." "Ah? A letter? What letter?" Suddenly hearing Yan's words, Qinshi's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. A letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Qinshi only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly, he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So, he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, "Yan, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy?" As soon as his voice fell, Qinshi pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was, the little girl who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. "It's over." Seeing the little fellow's performance, Qinshi's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit. At that moment, Qinshi even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Yan for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Qinshi firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore, he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Qinshi was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, "I tore up the letter." Torn? Qinshi was stunned. Then he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly, "My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done. MD." He had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Yan was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Yan did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Qinshi was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." Qinshi was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Qinshi could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Qinshi's eyes, Yan was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now, someone had actually started to write a love letter to Yan. Although Yan tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Qinshi was very clear in his heart, as the child continued to grow up, Yan's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Yan only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the 4 immortals, Qinshi was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Qinshi frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Yan took the initiative to hug Qinshi's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." Qinshi subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Yan, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Qinshi was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Qinshi's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. Nyin if, at this point Chin-shi could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed, if you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students? For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. Chin-shi tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, no. I won't like anyone and I won't fall in love with anyone. Hearing this, Chin-shi could not help but ask, are you so sure? What? Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them. Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, Chin-shi suddenly understood. So, she thought that her classmates were too stupid so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means two people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Chin-shi couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Mwah. The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Chin-shi and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. Daddy, you're so annoying. After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Chin-shi's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. Silly child, are you shy now? After today's conversation, Chin-shi finally realized Nyin was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Chung Hua and Yi successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the 3rd day after they set off. Chin-shi didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Chin-shi had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yi couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Chung Hua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The 3 great families of Ning province were the Xinyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families, but it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Chung Hua could be used as an example. His father was Genryo, one of the 8 great elders of the Xinyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xinyuan family, Genryo's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genryo, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genryo had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Chunghua was Genryo's youngest child, and at the same time his last child. Chunghua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genryo had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Chunghua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity. Reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Chunghua's life wasn't good at all. Chunghua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genryo made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam, Madam Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Chunghua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Chunghua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Chunghua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son, who asked Chunghua to only have one big brother left. Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genryo wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Chunghua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful 5th brother and 8th sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genryo didn't want to be sad, so from the day Chunghua was born, his 5th brother became the eldest brother, and his 8th sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Chunghua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the 2 brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Chunghua's eldest brother was Genyuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xianyuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the 3 major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genryo's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genryo naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Chunghua was born, Genryo handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Chunghua's tragedy. Genyuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Chunghua was still an infant, Genyuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Chunghua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Jingqi. She always felt that Chunghua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Chunghua, so she didn't want Genyuan Jingqi to get close to Chunghua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genyuan Jingqi away from Chunghua. Who would have thought that when Genryo heard about this, He would only ask Genuine Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Jingqi is my child and so is Cheng-Hua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Cheng-Hua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Cheng-Hua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genrio was one of the 8 elders in the family, and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Cheng-Hua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Cheng-Hua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Genuine Jingqi. Of course, Genuine Jingqi would never torture Cheng-Hua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Cheng-Hua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Cheng-Hua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many hundred years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuanying in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genrio originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Shen Yuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Cheng-Hua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genrio originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Hua's life is uncertain, as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genrio didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Cheng-Hua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day Qin wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven alone. Then, with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp's senses? Therefore, even if Cheng-Hua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genrio found it very hard to believe that Cheng-Hua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genrio could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genrio didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now, he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genrio had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Cheng-Hua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genrio had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genrio didn't know it all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old rag doll in her hand. This rag doll was personally sewn for Cheng-Hua. It was also Cheng-Hua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the rag doll with her fingers as she softly muttered, Don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins. Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genrio, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genrio still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Chunghua properly. That was why he had left Chunghua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Chunghua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Chunghua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Chunghua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xianyuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Chunghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone including Genrio. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Chunghua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genrio's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genrio had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. "Open the restriction. I want to see my mother." As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Chunghua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Chunghua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver, and then with a face full of excitement he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Chunghua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother, I'm back." When Chunghua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then she subconsciously cried out in shock, "Hua-er! Mother, it's me. I'm back. Hua-er, it's really you? Come here quickly, let mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Chunghua up. Then the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the Immortal Emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on Earth, Chunghua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Qinshi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Qinshi treated Nian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Chunghua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised but his parents won't wait. Now he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made mother worry." It's fine. It's good that you're back." Zhang looked at Chunghua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, Didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins?" This. Chunghua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So, he immediately smiled and replied, "Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday." Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Chunghua directly held her arm and said with a smile, Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then I'll tell you what happened in detail. The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang Zhang's incredulous gaze, Cheng Hua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple? After listening to Cheng Hua's story, the expression on Zhang Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Cheng Hua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen. Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple. He only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Cheng Hua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Shueqing at all, so Zhang Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Qin Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Ji Zun. Mr. Qin is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. You've bumped into a great opportunity. Zhang Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Cheng Hua had had to be lucky enough to become Ji Zun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Cheng Hua's return was indeed a great thing. But, what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Cheng Hua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang Zhang's room. The leader was Zhenrio. Other than Cheng Hua's elder brother, Zhenyuan Jingqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xinyuan family, Xinyuan Wuwang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard. The head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Cheng Hua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xinyuan Wuwang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Zhenrio's courtyard. Although Xinyuan Wuwang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xinyuan Wuwang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xinyuan Wuwang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Zhenrio immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice. Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Cheng Hua go? After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization. Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here. The Xinyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xinyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Zhenrio was very impressive all day in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xinyuan Wuwang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xinyuan Wuwang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Cheng Hua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Zhenrio's youngest son, Xinyuan Cheng Hua. A little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Cheng-Hua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genryo had such an outstanding son. Why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Cheng-Hua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Cheng-Hua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genryo's reminder, Cheng-Hua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Cheng-Hua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Cheng-Hua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family as a junior, how could Cheng-Hua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genryo saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Cheng-Hua for his great disrespect? Genryo was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Cheng-Hua had changed. Cheng-Hua had been by Qin-Shi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Cheng-Hua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal. It's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Shuiqing did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Qin-Shi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Cheng-Hua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Qin-Shi's every move affected him and Yi almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Cheng-Hua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Cheng-Hua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xinyuan Wuwang did not know what Cheng-Hua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Cheng-Hua was thinking at all. Yuan Liang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xinyuan Wuwang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genryo lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Cheng-Hua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Cheng-Hua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Cheng-Hua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Qin-Shi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks. Master, Mr. Chen did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free. Cheng-Hua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xinyuan Wuwang replied with a look of sudden realization. I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you two would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple. As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. Master, you're right. Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Cheng-Hua hesitated for a moment, but in the end he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Cheng-Hua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xinyuan Wuwang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Cheng-Hua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Chunghua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. Yuan Liang, you really have a good son. This child is called Chunghua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now? Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuan Liang, are you willing to become my in-laws? At that moment, Chunghua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genryo could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 511. No. Chunghua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Chunghua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Chunghua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genyuan Jingqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genryo did not urge Chunghua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Chunghua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Chunghua. Who would have thought that, after Chunghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Chunghua had the title of Supreme Disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Qin. Therefore, even if Chunghua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Chunghua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Chunghua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on. Since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Chunghua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Chunghua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Chunghua couldn't help but shudder. Then he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind, it's just that. At this point, Chunghua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of 1 yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Chunghua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Chunghua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the 1st lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xian Yuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Chenghua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xian Yuan family could enjoy. Genrio relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So, in terms of bloodline, Chenghua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that the patriarch of the Xian Yuan family was giving Qinshi enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Chenghua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chen that I would only be back for 7 days. So this marriage..." Chenghua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. 7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven? Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble. Rumble. In an instant, the thunder rumbled and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple. The moment Xinyuan Wuwang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Chenghua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Chenghua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Chenghua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then he quietly moved to Genrio's side. Father, did something big happen? The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chenghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, "Silence." Oh, okay. Chenghua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble. Rumble. The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. What's going on? Like Chenghua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Chenghua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Chenghua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xinyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Zhenren." Seeing this, Chenghua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Shenyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Changhua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Shenyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Changhua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang, explain to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Shenyuan family looked at Changhua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Changhua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genryo's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genryo's explanation, Changhua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the 3 enclosures was a grand event. Changhua had heard many rumors about the 3 enclosures since he was young. The so-called 3 enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago the 3 enclosures were originally a complete planet. Later on, something happened that caused the planet to be torn apart and turned into the 3 enclosures of today. Like the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure and the Heavenly Market enclosure were also plate-shaped landmasses that had been drifting in this vast universe for thousands of years. Because there were no stars to guide them, there was no trace of the 3 enclosures' whereabouts. The Supreme Palace enclosure was now near the solar system. Perhaps the Supreme Palace enclosure was still on the other side of the Milky Way 100,000 years ago. The 3 enclosures would meet once every 100 years, and the principle of its operation was still unknown. According to the speculation of a senior expert in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, the reason why the 3 enclosures would meet at regular intervals should be related to the arrangements left behind by the ancient powerhouses. In other words, the 3 enclosures were still hiding some shocking secrets that had not been discovered by anyone. In order to uncover this secret, since the establishment of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, its successive sect masters had been secretly searching for the truth. After various efforts they finally found a clue. This clue came from Great Illusionary Land. Changhua knew about the 3 enclosures, but he had never heard of the Great Illusionary Land. Therefore, after hearing this term he could not help but interrupt Genryo and ask directly, "Father, I still don't understand what you mean. This Great Illusionary Land, what does it have to do with me?" Hearing this, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on Genryo's face. He reached out and patted Chenghua's shoulder, then whispered in Chenghua's ear, "Prepare well, your opportunity is here." Chapter 513. For a junior like Changhua, the Great Illusionary Land was an extremely unfamiliar term. However, for existences like Genryo and even the Shenyuan family head, the Great Illusionary Land was a good place that symbolized opportunities and fortuitous encounters. Although the Great Illusionary Land was a specific name, it did not have a specific address. That was because the address it appeared at every time was not fixed. The Great Illusionary Land would only appear briefly in a thick fog on the day when the 3 enclosures converged. Every 100 years, the 3 enclosures would gradually get closer and more or less join together under the influence of an unknown force. Just like Asia, America, and Europe, if a sea was filled in between the 3 enclosures, then one could roughly see its original appearance when looking from afar in the starry sky. Once upon a time, it was also a complete planet. Every time the 3 enclosures converged, the fluctuation of the spirit energy of heaven and earth would become unusually intense, so much so that the spirit energy would gradually form a fog that would gradually cover the entire sky. At this time, one only needed to follow the spirit energy all the way. The place with the densest spirit energy would be the place where the Great Illusionary Land appeared. Unlike the unknown dangers of the Tianshu ruins, the Great Illusionary Land had real benefits. Genryo had a deep understanding of this problem. After all, if he had not been lucky enough to obtain the qualifications to enter the Great Illusionary Land and obtained many benefits from it, then Genryo, who was only from a collateral bloodline, would not have been able to sit in the position of the 8 Great Elders. At this point, it was necessary to first mention the so-called social resources and class consolidation. In fact, whether it was Earth or the Great Illusionary Land, except for some lucky people who were favored by the heavens, it was actually very difficult for ordinary people to climb from the bottom of society to the top of society. The Great Illusionary Land did not have a college entrance examination, so the Great Illusionary Land was the only way for everyone to reach the top in one step. Once one entered the Great Illusionary Land, all the opportunities and fortuitous encounters were in front of one's eyes. But it was a pity, the Great Illusionary Land could only allow 3,000 people to enter at a time. 3,000 people sounded like a lot. However, if it was placed in the entire Great Illusionary Land, this number was too small. Just Ning State alone had the Xinyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, as well as many slightly weaker mid-sized families. Moreover, besides the Ning Prefecture, there were still 8 other prefectures in the Supreme Palace enclosure that weren't inferior to the Ning Prefecture at all. Since everyone wanted to go in and get a share of the pie, then these 3,000 spots naturally needed to be properly distributed. Thus, with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven taking the lead, the slots were accurately allocated to the various forces according to their overall strength. The thunderclap drum earlier was actually an announcement to the various great powers about the number of slots they would be able to obtain this time. This was the fundamental reason why Chenghua had never heard of the existence of the Great Illusionary Land before. The quota was limited. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about the existence of the Great Illusionary Realm, the better. Otherwise, wouldn't those bumpkins from small families rebel against the heavens and swarm into the Great Illusionary Realm to change their fates? Therefore, it could be said that this was a carnival for the upper class of the Supreme Palace enclosure, and it had nothing to do with the general public. It was probably because the Tuoba family had suffered a heavy blow a few days ago, so during the distribution this time, the Xinyuan family and the Dongfang family were both given 3 slots, one more than before. Regarding this, the Xinyuan family patriarch was naturally overjoyed, so he immediately returned to the ancestral temple and used the excuse of inspecting the cultivation progress of his clansmen as an excuse to launch a large clan meeting that involved the entire Xinyuan family. Although it was called a large clan meeting, it was actually a martial arts competition. Anyone whose cultivation was above the Golden Core realm and below the Yuanying realm could sign up. As long as one obtained the top 3, they would be allowed to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. What needed to be mentioned here was, there was no requirement to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Even the Yuanying and Soul Formation cultivators could enter at will. However, as long as one Soul Formation cultivator entered the Great Illusionary Realm, then the 3,000 spots would immediately be reduced to 2,000 or even less. According to past experience, it was basically certain that the benefits of entering the Great Illusionary Realm with 3,000 Golden Core cultivators were the greatest. Therefore, the Golden Core cultivators became the key targets of the various forces. Only the strongest among them were qualified to enter the Great Illusionary Realm. Chenghua's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the Golden Core realm. Logically speaking, he was not qualified to know the inside story in advance. Considering that his master was the great Supreme Qin, the patriarch could not help but place high hopes on him. After all, he was the disciple of the Supreme Qin. Although his cultivation was slightly lower, with his actual combat ability he should not be too bad, right? However, nobody would have thought, after hearing Genryo's words, Chenghua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" What? Genryo looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Chenghua's elder brother did not enter the Great Illusionary Realm back then was that there was no 3rd spot, so he could only stay in the top 3. Now that there was an extra spot, Chenghua actually wanted to give it up directly? Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genryo only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genryo forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate? Mr. Qin only gave me 7 days. Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Chenghua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days I must return to Tianshu. Otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words Mr. Qin, Genryo's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Tuoba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Chen in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? You have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the great illusionary land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Chen can give you may not be as much as what the great illusionary land can give you. When the 4 words, great illusionary land, were mentioned, Genryo's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Chunghua what exactly was in the great illusionary land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the great illusionary land? After hearing Genryo say this, Chunghua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Chunghua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Chen would definitely be angry. In Chunghua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the great illusionary land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 5:14. Due to the lack of time, the Patriarch immediately announced the start of the great clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xianyuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xianyuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xianyuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background. As long as one's cultivation was above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan Meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan Meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan Meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the Great Clan Meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate and the sky was vast. Therefore, the Great Clan Meeting was actually equivalent to Huaxia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Xueqing had never been to the Great Palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the Great Palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Qin Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Chunghua and Yiji left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the 2nd day after Chunghua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genryo's constant persuasion, Chunghua finally signed up for the Great Clan Meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Qin Shi. Under the constant urging of the Patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Chunghua did not show any excitement on his face. The Patriarch seemed to be very interested in Chunghua's experience during this period, so he wanted to see what exactly he had learned under Qin Shi. Therefore, after hearing the news of Chunghua's appearance, the Patriarch immediately led the 8 elders to the arena where Chunghua was. In the arena, Chunghua and the elder stood facing each other. The elder did not know Chunghua, but he had learned about Chunghua's identity from the onlookers, so he was extremely polite as soon as he came up. "I'm older than you, young master. Now that I have the honor of exchanging pointers with you, please make your move first." As he spoke, the old man took out his Dharma treasure. It was a simple long saber, and its rank was a 3rd-grade spirit treasure. At first glance, one could tell that it was a collection of the elders for many years. If Chunghua's Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box was still there, then this long saber was naturally not a good item. According to the usual practice, the two sides should introduce their magic treasures before exchanging pointers. Therefore the elder roughly introduced his long saber. He estimated that with Cheng Hua's identity, his third-grade spirit treasure would not be good enough for him. Who would have thought? After hearing his introduction, Cheng Hua shook his head directly and then said calmly, "I won't use my magic treasure. Please make your move." At that moment, not only was the elder on the arena stunned, but even Genryo, who was flying in the sky, was also surprised. How could this child be so arrogant? Not using his phoenix perch scorched tail box, he actually wanted to fight against a peak golden elixir with his bare hands? Could a supreme disciple be so arrogant? Regarding this question, Genryo had wronged Cheng Hua. Because he did not know, not using magic treasures had long been a tradition of the Sai courtyard. The one who really made Cheng Hua decide not to rely on magic treasures to fight was actually not Qin Xueqing, who had entered the Dao through martial arts, but Qin Shi. As the saying went, loud voices come from afar, not from the autumn wind. You are just ordinary people. How can you understand great Supreme Master Chen's painstaking efforts? Chapter 5:15. Cheng Hua had also consulted Qin Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Qin Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Cheng Hua. There were 8 methods of immortals: pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance in materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Dao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Qin Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Cheng Hua had always thought that if the phoenix perch scorched tail box was still in his hands, Qin Xueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Xueqing, he had a discussion with Qin Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Cheng Hua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Qin Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the Jade Clear Cave Heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianshu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Qin Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, "There is no other reason other than the sword in your heart." Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. It was unknown whether he had confidence in Cheng Hua or in Great Supreme Qin. In short, when the clan leader saw Genryo fidgeting, he immediately waved his hand and calmly comforted him. "Yuan Liang, don't be anxious. Let's watch first." The result was just as the clan leader expected. Just when everyone thought that Cheng Hua would be defeated by the elder in one move, Cheng Hua made his move. They saw, in the face of the raging flames that covered the sky, Cheng Hua did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, like a bullet, he passed through the sea of flames and came to the elder's side at the fastest speed. Before the elder could even react, Cheng Hua's fist brought along a strong gust of wind and smashed towards his head. A long punch from a distance and a short punch from close range. This? At that moment, not only did the elder not react, even the clan leader and the 8 elders who were watching from the side were stunned. Was this the move that Cheng Hua learned from the Supreme Qin? Why did this move seem so strange? Bang! With a muffled sound, Cheng Hua's fist made close contact with the elder's forehead. Cheng Hua had been preparing for this punch for a long time. Previously, when he stood still, he seemed to be careless. In fact, he had been observing the elder's aura and flaws. Lang Fanyun? The name sounded nice, but the move was flashy and impractical. Although the flames in the sky looked scary, the real threat to Cheng Hua was the long saber hidden in the flames. Therefore, Cheng Hua only needed to find the path of the saber and successfully avoid it. Naturally, he could easily come to the elder's side. As a result, under everyone's dumbfounded expression, Cheng Hua's fists were like a storm, crazily smashing on the old man's protective shield. Bang! 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 Chapter 5:16. Punching the Nansha nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Cheng Hua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Xueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the three enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family head hoped that Cheng Hua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Cheng Hua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Cheng Hua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Cheng Hua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Cheng Hua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Yida, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Cheng Hua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom! A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough. Young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again. Otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that. A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use, did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xianyuan Wuwang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Haha, Yuan Liang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught? It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see. Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Cheng Hua did not spend much effort and easily defeated the 2 of them. By noon the next day, most of the weaker cultivators had been eliminated, and the competition officially entered the white-hot stage. Cheng Hua's 4th match was against a middle golden elixir stage cultivator. This middle golden elixir stage cultivator was incredible. Because he was of the direct bloodline, he even called the current family head, uncle. The Xianyuan family had many members, and this person was older than Cheng Hua by 20 years, so Cheng Hua did not recognize him. Of course, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to recognize him. Speaking of which, it was strange, unknowingly, that rash and willful Xianyuan Cheng Hua had now become much more low-key. Therefore, in the face of this direct bloodline cultivator's provocation, Cheng Hua did not even have much of an emotional fluctuation. He only treated the other party as a moving sandbag that could be easily crushed. As a result, Cheng Hua entered the final round just like that without any suspense. The family head was not very satisfied with this result, because Cheng Hua had not displayed any moves other than martial arts. Moreover, he was very curious about what Cheng Hua had learned from Great Supreme Qin. Therefore, in order to let Cheng Hua display his full strength, the family head decided to play some underhanded tricks. He ordered people to replace the opponent that Cheng Hua was supposed to encounter, and put the person who was recognized as the strongest in this meeting in front of Cheng Hua in advance. This person's name was Xianyuan Wuhan. He was of the direct bloodline, and his cultivation was at the peak of the golden elixir stage. However, although Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation was high, what was truly frightening about him was actually his age. Because this year he was already 33 years old. It was precisely because of this, Xianyuan Wuhan had completely fallen from the altar. Even if no one at the same level could defeat him, no one would submit to him from the bottom of their hearts. However, Xianyuan Wuhan remained unmoved by the suspicions and slander of the outside world. After every clan meeting he would disappear from everyone's sight. No one knew what he had been doing for the past 100 years, but as long as the great clan gathering began, everyone would think of this name, Xianyuan Wuhan. Because everyone wanted to know, another 100 years had passed. Was Xianyuan Wuhan still at the peak of Jindan realm? As long as he remained in the Aurus core stage he would always be the most talked about topic. The result was just as everyone expected. Xianyuan Wuhan came again. This was his 3rd time participating in the great clan gathering. Along the way, many of the competitors who were unfortunate enough to meet him didn't even bother to step onto the stage, and directly stood below the stage to admit defeat. And this situation continued until Cheng Hua appeared. When Cheng Hua stepped onto the stage expressionlessly, including the manager who presided over this competition, almost everyone was shocked. On the stage, after Cheng Hua stood still, Xianyuan Wuhan, who usually didn't like to speak much, took the initiative to speak for the first time. I've seen your competition before. You have a lot of potential. Hearing this, Cheng Hua couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment, then he smiled and said, "Thank you for your attention, Mr. Wuhan." Cheng Hua is very grateful. As the saying goes, the one who reaches the top comes first. Before an immortal cultivator was sure of the difference in seniority between them, they would usually address the other party as Mr. or Senior. Therefore, it wasn't a problem for Cheng Hua to address Xianyuan Wuhan as Mr. The moves you used in the previous few competitions were very strange. Every move you made seemed simple, but in fact, it contained some kind of truth. Perhaps Xinyuan Wuhan also knew why he would suddenly meet Changhua, so he didn't immediately start fighting as he usually did. Instead, he took the initiative to chat with Changhua. The scene didn't seem to be as hostile as people imagined. Changhua was about to reply, but unexpectedly Xinyuan Wuhan suddenly changed the topic. He suddenly used a lifeless tone and calmly said, "But, the realm of this cultivation technique isn't high. Although it's very ingenious, it's only limited to this. If you only rely on this cultivation technique, you shouldn't be able to last more than 10 moves against me, so I suggest you, either directly admit defeat or take out some of your trump cards. Let me have a good feel of it. What's so special about the inheritance of the sovereign bloodline?" Xinyuan Wuhan didn't say the last sentence in front of everyone. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Chenghua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Chenghua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Changhua was actually entirely because of Sovereign Qin. Changhua was somewhat non-committal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Changhua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xinyuan Wuhan. Changhua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me?" Chenghua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xinyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xinyuan Wuhan's face. "Oh, come then." The battle suddenly started just like that. Chenghua's figure was like a ghost, and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xinyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Changhua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Changhua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang 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 sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Changhua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xinyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xinyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Changhua. Chenghua's movements were very fast, but Xinyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Chenghua's moves were very ingenious, but Xinyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Changhua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xinyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Chenghua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then, Changhua wouldn't be far from failure. Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Changhua learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Shueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Changhua wanted to completely defeat Xinyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xinyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xinyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Chenghua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Changhua. The reason was not that Xinyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Changhua used were all on the surface, so Xinyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground and every grain was round. On the stage, Changhua and Xinyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Changhua in unison. Since Xinyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Changhua, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Changhua would definitely fail, as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Chenghua also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Chenghua was merely in the middle stage of the gold core realm. How could he fight with Shenyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the gold core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Chenghua's defeat was inevitable. This child, he's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The Patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the Patriarch's question, Genryo fell silent. He did not respond. I heard that Mr. Qin once fought against the 4 immortals of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven by himself. So I originally thought that this master of the heavenly pivot must have some great ability to maneuver unhindered and invincible. Who would have thought that after seeing him today, I would know that the rumors were also untrue? At this point, Shenyuan Wuhan suddenly couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Supreme Being? That's all. Shenyuan Wuhan's voice was very soft, but his tone was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was implying something with these words. So, Chenghua immediately stopped in his tracks. He slowly turned around, and the expression on his face finally became serious. I know, you said this just to provoke me to fight you with all my strength. But I still want to remind you, you can scold me, but you shouldn't have brought Mr. Chen into this. As he spoke, Chenghua stretched out his right hand. Then, without any movement from Chenghua, a long sword with a cold blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. Come on. Don't you all want to know what I learned from Mr. Qin? Then I'll show you today. What exactly did I learn? He didn't know when it started, but the figure who smiled all day to make his daughter happy had become an absolutely inviolable existence in Chenghua's mind. Shenyuan Wuhan could say that he wasn't good at learning, but he definitely couldn't say that Mr. Chen's reputation was undeserved. Including Genryo, the Patriarch, the 8 elders, and Shenyuan Wuhan, who was in front of him at this moment, almost everyone was eager to know what peerless cultivation method Chenghua had learned from Qinshi. Was the cultivation method used by a supreme being really that important? Thinking of this, Chenghua couldn't help but lower his head slightly to look at the long sword in his hand. In a trance, he saw the scene of Qinshi holding the little fellow and standing in the courtyard with a smile on his face. Yes, Chenghua was very lucky. Others would lose their lives in vain if they went to the Tianshu ruins. Not only was he fine when he went to the Tianshu ruins, but he was also lucky enough to live with Supreme Qin for a period of time. But who would have thought that, during this period of time, what really benefited Chenghua was Mr. Chen's way of dealing with people. Qinshi indeed didn't accept Chenghua as his disciple, and he had never even planned to do so. But in Chenghua's heart, Qinshi was still half his master. It was just that he didn't dare to say it out loud. So, Shenyuan Wuhan could scold him, but he couldn't scold Mr. Chen. Chapter 519. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Chenghua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Shenyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Chenghua pointed his long sword at Shenyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Shenyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Chenghua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Shenyuan Wuhan looked at Chenghua with slight confusion. But then he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. No, something's wrong. Chenghua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Chenghua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So, Shenyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Chenghua had also finished accumulating power and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me. Chenghua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. The sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. This? Just as Cheng Hua waved this sword, the family head, who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the three major families in Ningzhou, the Xinyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen. Such a strange situation, just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time, so it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Qin Shi had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Cheng Hua indirectly. However, Cheng Hua was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was, Sword One. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness nor the great Chen Yuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Qin Shi created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Qin Shi passed the first move to Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Qin Shi passed on Sword One to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Qin Shi's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword One confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Qin Shi's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution, then there was the Shen Tian Evil Emperor's saber and sword dual arts, and then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Qin Shi could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Qin Shi had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Qin Shi seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Cheng Hua, the most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Qin Shi still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm, so Qin Shi needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel, then he could continue to use it. Qin Shi personally leaned toward sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword Technique and Dark Valley Sword Technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. Bye daddy, bye mommy. Unlike Qin Shi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested. Their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation like Nian Nian understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Cheng Hua and Yi loved to eat chocolate, Nian Nian also ate a lot with them so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket, called Ferrero. Usually there were 3 in a box and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat one bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Chapter 521. Speaking of which, Li Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Yin Yin, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual, outstanding, performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Li Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Li Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do, he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Li Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked, and that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Li Sanduo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The third grade was a very important turning point. Li Sanduo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row, so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Li Sanduo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Li Sanduo wasn't very common. Although Nian Yin didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian Yin didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Li Sanduo's words, Nian Yin turned to look at him, and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Li Sanduo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. Thank you, class leader. Li Sanduo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Yin Yin's drawer, so when he saw Yin Yin nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Li Sanduo had expected. Therefore, once there was bullying, it was usually a group of people who committed the crime together. Lisandra's personality seemed casual and undisciplined. He would make the teacher angry in class whenever he had nothing to do. In fact, it was clear that he was a rather proud and solitary person. It was difficult for people like him to make friends. Thus, he could only use all kinds of outrageous behavior to gain more attention and cover up the loneliness in his heart. It was also because of this that Lisanduo would rather suffer silently than show his weak side in front of others. He didn't need anyone's help. Whether it was his parents, teachers, or classmates, the only one who could help him was himself. Thus, even if he was bullied today, Lisanduo didn't need any help. Because he wouldn't easily bow down and admit defeat. Nian couldn't figure out these complicated problems at the moment. Thus, her thoughts at the moment were very simple. That was, to help Lisanduo get rid of the bullies. To achieve this goal, Nian purposely observed Lisanduo for a long time today. However, throughout the day, Lisanduo didn't show any signs of abnormality. During class he would still interrupt the teacher's lecture. After class he would quietly sit in his seat. During this period he didn't interact with anyone. Thus, Nian couldn't tell who was bullying him. Without catching the culprit, Nian couldn't help even if she wanted to. Thus she could only watch from the side. It wasn't easy to wait until school was over, but Lisanduo ran away with his school bag. This made Nian, who wanted to know more about the case, feel a little depressed. She had no choice but to complain to her father. As usual, Qinshi arrived at the school gate on time. When Nian came to his side, Qinshi picked her up from the ground. "Hey, what happened? Who made our little princess angry?" Since yesterday, when he learned that the little girl had begun to experience puppy love, Qinshi increased her security level. Thus, even if he was in the courtyard, he could check on the little girl's situation through the big cat. Thus, even without Nian saying anything, Qinshi already knew what she had experienced today. The little girl couldn't figure out Lisandra's behavior, so she immediately told Qinshi the whole story. Seeing that the little girl was so warm-hearted, Qinshi naturally had to encourage her. Thus, after thinking for a while, he directly pointed out the key point. "Nian, since Lisanduo was already crying on the table when you saw him, that means he must have been bullied before you came to school. So if you want to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, you just have to wake up earlier in the future and be the first to go to class." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. What Daddy said made sense. Both of its ears trembled slightly, and its tensed body immediately relaxed. Then it returned to its soft and feeble state. Meow. The big cat obediently laid back down as if nothing had happened. The children had no idea that they had just walked through the gates of hell. Because of the seal in her body, even though Nian had already started cultivating, the strength of her body did not change much. Therefore, after being pushed hard by the leader of the children, Nian immediately staggered and leaned against the railing of the corridor. From the beginning to the end, the leader of the children did not take her seriously. But he did not expect. After being pushed away, Nian immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, then shouted angrily, "You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave." This completely angered the other party. After all, he was a 6th grade student. Facing Nian, who had skipped a grade to become a 3rd grade, he naturally had an absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. So he immediately grabbed Nian's wrist and used all his strength to twist her fingers. "Let go. Believe it or not, I'll beat you up. Get out of my way." An absurd farce was suddenly staged. Nian held on tightly to the person's arm, and the leader of the children struggled with all his might. After a few seconds of entanglement, the other party suddenly lost his patience. So he no longer cared about gender differences and raised his leg to kick Nian. Seeing this, the big cat could only helplessly close its eyes. It had no choice. Qinshi did not allow it to interfere. Bang! The big cat did not stop him, and Nian's calf suffered a heavy kick. This was great. Nian was completely angered by the other party's actions. "Do you still remember what Daddy said? We don't bully others, but we definitely can't let others bully us." So, she immediately copied the other party, raised her right leg and without a word kicked over. Moreover, her kick was even more ruthless and decisive than the other party's. After being kicked by her, the expression on the leader's face was very interesting. You still dare to fight back? Brothers, beat her up for me. The other children had some reservations, but after seeing that Yin Yin dared to fight back, they swarmed over. They wanted to gang up on Yin Yin, just like when they ganged up on others in the past. Meow. The big cat could not bear to watch any longer. But just as it stood up again and was about to jump over to interfere, a thin figure suddenly rushed out from the front door. Crack. A crisp sound was heard and everyone, including Yin Yin, could not help but turn to look. It was Lee Sanduo. After seeing that Yin Yin was being ganged up on, this kid suddenly had the courage to pick up a plastic broom and hit the back of one of the children who was standing there. Chapter 525. Kids always like to join in the fun. Therefore, as soon as the fight started in the music room, the entire teaching building was in an uproar. Students from every class swarmed into the hallway to watch the fight. Some busybodies even put on a look of wanting to see the world in chaos, and actually clapped and cheered excitedly. There was still about half an hour before the morning reading time, so most of the teachers were already in the office, eating breakfast and chatting. Look, there are kids fighting outside. One of the teachers heard the commotion outside and immediately went to the window to take a look. What he saw was a big deal. The teacher was so scared that he threw away the soy milk and bread in his hand, and then rushed out of the office in a hurry. One must know that this was a primary school in the capital. Once a fight broke out, not only would the school punish the child involved, but they would also hold the teacher responsible for the child's class. Including Yin Yin, there were not only 2 kids pushing and pulling each other in the hallway, but as many as 7 or 8. Therefore, the nature of this matter had escalated to the level of a gang fight, which was why it caused such a big commotion. They were in a gang fight. Everyone stop. What are you doing? The first to arrive at the scene was a PE teacher. Primary school PE teachers were very different from middle school PE teachers. Because he often taught the children broadcast gymnastics, the teacher recognized the leading child at a glance. Li Hu, stop it. Li Hu and his brothers were squeezing Lee Sanduo into a corner, so they did not notice the PE teacher's appearance at all. At this time, Yin Yin, who had been standing at the back, saw the teacher's arrival. One had to admit that this little thing was quite clever. After seeing the PE teacher appear, she immediately took a few steps back, then pointed at the group of people in front of her and said righteously, "Teacher, they're bullying Lee Sanduo. I'm helping him." Until now, the children still did not notice the PE teacher's appearance. All of you stop. Seeing this, the PE teacher could not help but be a little angry. After a violent shout, he directly reached out and grabbed one of the children's ears, then pulled the child out of the crowd. Stand still. Don't move. If you dare to move again, I'll slap you. The physical education teacher also had a bad temper. He was not polite to these naughty kids at all. Under his tugging and kicking interference, Li Hu and the others immediately retreated to the side like mice seeing a cat, hanging their heads and not daring to move. Lee Sanduo was thin and small to begin with. In addition, Li Hu and the others were mostly 6th graders, so the PE teacher could tell who was the victim at a glance. Which class are you from? Are you okay? Chapter 527. In the face of school bullying, silence was not a good solution. Silence was a disguised form of retreat. So instead of hoping that the bad guys would be kind and show mercy, it was better to tell them with the most firm attitude. We're not that easy to bully. Maybe I can't beat you, but I'm definitely not afraid of you. If you kick me, I'll return the favor with a punch. As long as I don't fall, I'll never bow down to evil. Lee Sanduo really experienced this feeling today. Although he had been beaten up so badly that he was limping a little, he was still able to walk. But at least at this moment, Lee Sanduo was still in a very good mood. It had to be said, it felt good to use his fists to win respect for himself. Recalling the bravery he displayed at the critical moment, Lee Sanduo suddenly felt as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He walked with vigor and vigor. Class monitor, don't worry. If they dare to cause trouble in the future, I'll never be afraid of them again. So what if they have more people? I'll punch them until they cry. Like all boys, Lee Sanduo's performance before and after the incident was like a different person. He kept bragging about his brave performance just now. But after Nian heard it, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. It was not good to show off without support. So, Lee Sanduo couldn't help but poke Nian, then asked with a puzzled face, "Class monitor, what's wrong with you?" Nian glanced at him but still ignored him. Instead, she frowned slightly and muttered to herself, No, Auntie didn't teach me that. When Li Hu kicked me, I should have used my knee to block his foot, then raised my elbow to hit his chin. That way he would have instantly lost his ability to fight." As he spoke, the little guy even began to mimic the movements of his hands. Qin Xueqing taught her some basic martial arts moves, but she was still young so she couldn't understand the subtleties. Therefore, after everything had been settled, she finally remembered the moves that Qin Xueqing had taught her. Nian gestured as if there was no one around. After seeing this scene, Li Sanduo's expression was very interesting. That's right. Wasn't the main culprit who started this war the class leader who always acted like a good student in front of him? If it wasn't for the class monitor, would Li Sanduo be able to walk out of the principal's office unscathed today? Thinking of this, Li Sanduo didn't dare to say another word. As the two of them returned to the classroom under the watchful eyes of the entire class, the farce finally came to an end. After Li Hu and his group were severely warned by the principal, they were completely dispirited. After that, not only did Li Sanduo never see them again, but even Nian's drawer didn't have chocolate anymore. Now that he thought about it, Nian seemed to have suffered a loss. Life returned to its usual tranquility. The weather in Shangjing gradually became hot. The tea house welcomed the peak season again, but unfortunately, its owner was no longer in the mood to run it. Because of this, Gu Lao had to make a special trip to the side courtyard to drink tea with Chen Shi under the old locust tree. The two played chess and chatted. Their days were particularly comfortable. The life of a retired veteran was probably like this. Early in the morning, Chen Shi sent Nian to school. Not long after returning to the courtyard, there was a rush of knocking outside the courtyard. He thought that Gu Lao was here to drink tea again, so he opened the door with a smile on his face. But what Chen Shi didn't expect was, when he opened the door, it wasn't Gu Lao who appeared in front of him, but a man and a woman. Chen Shi knew these two people. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. The two belonged to the Wu Lian inspection office and were responsible for monitoring him. The year before last, at the request of Qin Yongwang, they delivered a car to his family. What's the matter? Chen Shi wasn't a voyeur, so under normal circumstances he didn't release his divine sense to pay attention to the situation around him. After all, he lived in the capital of the country, and in the most central part of the city. Naturally, he didn't have to worry too much about safety. Anyway, as long as no one broke into the courtyard, Chen Shi didn't care. "Mr. Chen, it's like this." Seeing that Chen Shi's attitude was still mild, the young man called Xiao Wang hesitated for a moment before he said, "We just received an emergency report that someone may cause trouble on Chang'an Street tomorrow. Hohai is not far from Chang'an Street. The leader is worried that if there is an accident it may affect you, so he asked us to inform you in advance so that you can prepare in advance." After hearing what Xiao Wang said, Chen Shi was instantly amused. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was a bit interesting. What was Chang'an Street? The first street of Wuxia. Not only was there the Forbidden City in Tiananmen Square on this street, but there was also Zongnanhai in the Great Hall of the People. Who would dare to cause trouble in such a place? They must have eaten too much, right? Chen Shi subconsciously felt that this matter was a bit ridiculous. After he pondered for a moment, he suddenly realized the deeper meaning of it. It turned out that Wang Chuanju was giving him a heads up. Since Wu Lian had already sent someone to inform him, it meant that this matter wasn't groundless. Something big was going to happen tomorrow. After all, things were not the same as before. Now that the internet was so advanced, once something happened on Chang'an Street, it would spread throughout the country and even the world in an instant. How embarrassing would that be? It would be embarrassing for the whole country. Chapter 528. Chen Shi was very curious about what would happen tomorrow, so he asked Xiao Wang in detail. But no matter how he probed, Xiao Wang refused to reveal any details. He didn't know if he really didn't have enough authority, or Wang Chuanju deliberately told him not to say anything. In short, no matter what the truth was, Chen Shi's curiosity was successfully aroused by Xiao Wang. It was said that within 10 years Huaxia would have a total of 96 new types of frigates, including aircraft carriers, and officially enter the naval establishment. Under such circumstances, there were still people who dared to make trouble on Chang and Street. It had to be said that they were really courageous. As an outstanding young man of the new era who grew up singing, "I love Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the sun rises on Tiananmen Square." As long as Qin Shi thought about what might happen tomorrow on Chang'an Street, he really wanted to immediately move a small stool to the front row to occupy a good seat. This was a very pure family plot, and it had nothing to do with personal experience. As long as one was not born rebellious, one would have a special feeling for the homeland that raised them. Homeland, homeland, homeland. That was the meaning. Of course, with Qin Shi's current cultivation, he could basically be regarded as a god who lived on Earth. Gods would not intervene in the affairs of the mortal world, but they would always pay attention to every move in the mortal world. And this kind of behavior that clearly had the ability to intervene but chose to stay out of it to watch the fun, was often said to be eating melons. Just like the little girl who watched the trailer of a certain animated movie, after watching the trailer she would naturally wait in front of the TV on time, only hoping that the movie was more exciting than the trailer. Qin Shi was such a qualified melon eater now. Therefore, early the next morning after Qin Shi sent Yin Yin to school again, he directly released his divine sense. From Jiangguimen to Fuxing Gate in the west. With Tiananmen Square as the center, any movement within a radius of 10 kilometers was under his control. Xiaowang did not lie to him. On this day the Forbidden City was still open to the public, but the security forces on Tiananmen Square were obviously more than usual. It could be said that there was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. In addition to these guards on the surface, there were also many plainclothes people disguised as tourists wandering around the square. On the surface, everything was as usual, but secretly they were jittery and paranoid. It's a bit interesting, even snipers are here? Qin Shi returned to the courtyard, but his attention was always on Chang'an Street. In addition to a few snipers hidden on the viewing platform, there were 3 buses with travel agency signboards parked not far from the flag stand. There were nearly 100 people in the 3 cars. All of them were warriors and most of them were at the level of transforming strength. In addition to these conventional arrangements, Qin Shi also found that there was a celestial overseeing each of the 4 cardinal directions of the square. From this, it could be seen how much importance the Wu Lian attached to this impending big event. Because they did not know when the other party would take action, the guards on the square had to be in a state of high tension at all times so that they could control the troublemakers as soon as the incident happened and prevent the situation from escalating. In fact, since Qin Xueqing and the 300 deities of Daiyu Island were not present, it meant that the troublemakers could not pose a threat, so there was no need for the deities to suppress them. This was a contest between mortals. The reason why Wang Chuanju sent someone to inform Qin Shi was mainly because Qin Shi lived nearby. Once the situation changed and went out of the Wu Alliance's control, Qin Shi would have to step in and resolve everything in time to prevent the innocent people from being alarmed. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was very thoughtful. She did not even ask Qin Shi for help, but she indirectly made Qin Shi pay attention to this matter. As long as Qin Shi paid attention to this matter, then everything else would be easy to deal with. It was not that Wang Chuanju was so shrewd that she even wanted to scheme against Qin Shi, but because this matter was too important. After all, Tiananmen Square was the face of Wuxia, so no accidents could happen. Once the operation began, the Wu Lian would catch all these criminals in one fell swoop. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was very reliable. But what she did not expect was, after the Wu Lian had made all the preparations, there was still no sign of the troublemakers showing up. Qin Shi sat on the rocking chair and waited from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the streets of Chang'an were still as peaceful as ever. The warm sunlight sprinkled on one's body, and a long wait inevitably made one feel sleepy. Boss, didn't the higher-ups say that something would happen today? How come we haven't even seen a single shadow after waiting for so long? Wait slowly. Are you still hoping for something to happen? Let me tell you, it's best if nothing happens. If something does, you'll cry. In a police car next to the square, 2 men in police uniforms were holding binoculars and chatting idly. Their task today was very simple, which was to maintain order at the scene to avoid causing panic among the crowd. As basic police officers, the 2 of them did not know what would happen today, but this did not prevent them from speculating. Something big was going to happen today. Therefore, the 2 of them were like Qin Shi now, and even somewhat hoped that the troublemakers would show up soon. What time is it now?